Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm so excited for you to listen to the show today. There's so much great stuff in here. We get into the evidence of demand generation, marketing ROI, and talk about some core concepts like broad versus narrow targeting, the optimal marketing budget, bursting versus spreading your spend out. This is a really awesome show. I hope you enjoy it. And one final note, if you love listening to this podcast, please leave a review in Apple or Spotify. We really appreciate it.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Marc Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
Welcome back to the show. Today, we've got a returning guest, a friend of the show, Dan White. Dan, thanks for coming back on the show.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, and for good reason. You've got a new book out, the Smart Advertising book. It's really good. V and I know you both gave us both a chance to read and preview it. It's really awesome. Before we get into that, I want to just talk about a little bit about your background. So you're marketing and insights innovator. For anyone who doesn't follow Dan, there's a ton of great stuff that he puts on LinkedIn. Visual communication, like visual concepts, like awesome. Former CMO, you're one of the people that co-developed Kantar's BrandZ, the world's biggest brand equity measurement system. 4-time author of some of the best marketing books in the world. And today we're going to be speaking about the Smart Advertising book. So Dan, thanks again for joining us.
No problem.
When it comes to marketing, there's we talk a lot about 4 Ps, like big M marketing. And one of the things that came out from Kantar, or not Kantar's, I just said Kantar with your intro, with Capero, they did a study with the Swedish Advertising Federation that found that the vast majority of marketers, even though we talk a lot about the 4 Ps, the vast majority of them are spending all of their time in the promotional P. So, your book is very timely and valuable because of that. Like, so much of what we do is on the advertising. So, before we get into the book in great detail, maybe if you could just tell us a little bit about your career and how it led you to this book and why this book fits in with the others.
Yeah, sure. I think I started actually in this area. When I left university, my first job was with Millward Brown, which is now part of Kantar. Mm-hmm. So it was a market research agency, and it focused on brand tracking and also particularly on advertising pre-testing. So actually, I spent a lot of my early years trying to help advertisers measure and improve their advertising. And this spanned a career of nearly 30 years. So I was always involved to some extent over these years in advertising research. And I estimated that I've been involved in research on about 450 advertising campaigns. So it's kind of like it's my heartland. It's where I started. And it was from there that I then expanded to understand the wider brand context, and then the wider kind of all aspects of marketing, not just what I mean, all of the 4 Ps of marketing. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of, and then my books have been almost the reverse order, where I started with the marketing book, which is the overview of everything, all the Ps, all the influences, the whole picture. Then zoomed into, okay, what about the brand piece? How do you develop a profitable brand? And now even more specific, I guess, which is the promotion, the advertising side.
It's an interesting career path. Like, it's kind of like coming back to your roots at the very beginning.
Right. Exactly that. That's what it feels like. And, I actually found that the hardest book to write was the marketing one, because we all have our specialisms and biases, and I'd done a lot in advertising and then brand. So I had to do a lot of research and understanding and talking to people about the other aspects of marketing that I was less familiar with. Whereas this one is kind of like, well, it's in my blood. And I think it's possibly my best book in that it was the one that just flowed out of me most naturally. Okay. It's the one that I intuitively understood. I felt I understood best as well.
Yeah.
Okay, a quick question for you. What gap did you see in the market, or maybe as you were working and you were seeing, you were obviously interacting with many different people, you probably identified a gap and you're like, you know what, we need to be better. What was that moment for you that you're like, okay, I got to go do this. I got to go start writing some books because people around me just don't know. I don't know. That could be overreaction, but
no, it's about right. I think the biggest gap I saw, or the biggest need I saw, was advertising has been around a long time and it keeps evolving. And I don't necessarily think it's getting worse or better over time necessarily, but I think that's a shame because it should be getting better. Right? As we learn more and we amass evidence, and we should be, each decade advertising should be more effective than the decade before, I'd have thought, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And I think it's because people come into marketing and advertising and then they spend a few years getting a bit better and then they move on. There's a high turnover. So although, the learning's important to improve, a particular person's skills, but the whole industry isn't getting necessarily any better. It's like a loop that just it's like treading water, learning to make sure we don't get any worse. And there are a couple of areas. I think there is an area where things are worse, which is because of the increased spend on what people know as performance marketing, activation advertising. And I think actually that advertising is getting slightly better over time, but at the expense of the advertising designed to build long-term brand building, which I think is getting a bit worse over time. So I wouldn't say advertising is getting worse. It's just the skills are now shifting towards the short-term responses and less towards the long-term brand building. And my book aims to cover both of those. And it probably has a bias towards the long-term because that's my bias as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the your whole series of books is the smart fill in the blank, but why smart? And obviously not dumb, but
dumb marketing, dumb advertising.
Yeah.
Well, I guess like a lot of these things, when you build a brand, my personal brand is a bit of a fluke. I did call the smart marketing book because I wanted it to be seen to be based on evidence. Smart, not just made up. A lot of marketing books are just an opinion from someone, and a lot of it is not grounded. The idea, I came from market research. Everything has to be based on data. That's how I formulate what I do. I'm a very data-driven person. So, smart came from that. But then after the first book did well, I wanted to call the second one the Smart Branding book for branding reasons for myself, to build a distinctive brand asset of the word smart around my books. And then obviously that's continued with the Smart Advertising book. So it's a combination of the two, I guess. And I'm trying, and my website's called smartmarketing.me. Little plug there. Do you see how I did that?
You've done
well
this
done.
before.
Yeah, I've done this before. So smart is one of my assets. The word smart, concept smart. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. The evidence-based part is really interesting. I think because that was something I've definitely picked up in your books, and V and I have had billions of conversations. It feels like at this point around the importance of using evidence. One of the things that kind of struck me is that when it comes to like ads, there's a lot of people doing a lot of things, but not necessarily knowing if they're doing things right. They just do it, and you don't need training, you don't need any of that kind of stuff. And it's like global ad spend. Did a bit of research. We're projecting to hit $1 trillion by 2027. So, from the evidence, the smart evidence, is advertising a legitimate driver for brand growth, or is it just like we're addicted to crack?
Well, this is the hardest question of all, and I have not. I apologize. I apologize in advance. I don't have a definitive answer. I can't speak today. Let's try. Look, I can't give you a definitive answer on that. It is the more I learn, the more I realize I don't understand about how to measure advertising returns properly. There's so many conflicting ways and perspectives about how you should or shouldn't try and do it. It's one of the hardest areas. But I do think there's enough evidence that brands that spend on advertising do better than brands that don't. And that, if you're in a competitive market where brands spend and you don't, you're very unlikely to succeed. There's a lot of indirect ways of illustrating that advertising is necessary in many, many spheres. But it doesn't mean to say that advertising is always going to work for you.
Right.
We know, for example, that the bigger you are, the bigger brand you are, the higher revenue you have in an absolute sense, the bigger return you can expect from advertising. That's absolutely clear. And it kind of makes sense in the sense that, what it costs you to buy a certain amount of exposure through paid media, for example, is pretty similar whether you're an absolutely huge brand or a tiny, tiny brand. It doesn't, make that much difference. So you're going to get a better return if there are more people out there who could buy you and do buy you or would buy you, etc., etc. So I think that's really important. People do forget that. But the other big factor is people can and do measure the short-term effects of advertising, but don't always reflect the longer-term effects accurately. Even something simple as, if in the short term, this advertising helps you acquire more new customers than you would have done, great. Yeah. There's some value to that. But you've got to then consider the lifetime value of each new customer. And that's not always factored in it's not always attributed to what that advertising did, the advertising that brought in that customer. That's quite hard to do. And with anyway, you see what I mean? It's a mind, my daughter would say it's a minefield. It was when she was young, she got the phrase wrong, but I actually think it's even better because it's a bit like a mind, the expression with an F star. Yeah. Like a clean version of that. It is a minefield and it's hard to get around.
Yeah. That's such a good point. What's fascinating, I think, all three of us here, we have nearly, each over 2 decades of experience in the field, if you will, of advertising. And I think three, maybe half 3.
Yeah.
So. I'm really old. Carry on.
So my apologies. So I think for many of us, I think we have this general sense that we think we know everything, right? And what's interesting, and I guess this is where we're going to stem from, what the first question here is, what are some of those misconceptions on how ads actually work that you've been able to identify and say, hey, here's what you're missing, Mr. Person that you've been in the industry for 20 plus years?
Well, one is that there are 2 big ones, right? One is that advertising can create demand for a category.
Oh, good one.
I think in exceptional circumstances with a brand new category people have never heard of and being the first brand or one of the first brands to talk about it, yes, that can create demand for the category, but that is really, really rare. And you cannot create demand. I was actually talking to a guy, Ben Oliver, who works for an Australian wine company, and he was saying, I won't go into the details about which brand and the strategy and all that, but he was saying that at one point they were trying to focus a new brand to try and get young people, like in their early 20s, to drink wine. That was the strategy. This brand is going to appeal to them in a totally new way. It didn't. Young people don't like that in Australia, do not want to drink wine. It didn't make them drink wine. It didn't change the category at all. Weirdly enough, for whatever reason, the way they advertised it appealed to 45 plus men. And actually they found a market by luck. And that happened. You got to be honest, in marketing, sometimes you try something, it doesn't work, but you find something that does work and you go from there and you can build. But, so creating demand is exceptionally rare. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is the idea that you're actually kind of getting people to switch, in their heads, that actually you're persuading them to buy you instead of something else. And that's in many that's not a very useful way of thinking about how advertising is likely to work. The idea that you're going, oh, I thought I was, I usually buy these kind of brands, and now I'm going to buy that one. It's not how it works, because consumers don't pay enough attention, they don't care enough, and also they don't necessarily fully believe what you're saying anyway. They just, as we say in the UK, they take it with a pinch of salt. They barely take it in at all. I mean, you're lucky enough to get them to remember anything from the advertising.
That's so true.
So all you're really doing most of the time is just getting them to kind of register and remember your brand name, and for it to be a bit more salient next time they buy a bottle of wine or whatever it is. And that is, but I say just, that is powerful. That bias, that putting it up just a pecking order a bit in probability. It's all about probabilities. Doing that can be very valuable.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think we've all. I'm speaking for V and you, I think, but maybe I shouldn't. But I think we've all had that journey ourselves where we go, no, we can create demand, and then after a while, I go, am I
joking?
Am I actually do? Or we can make somebody switch, from product A to product B if only we fill in the blank.
Had more money.
Yeah,
but
and
but the way that assumes that people are rational, and we can say rational factual things to people, and they'll go, "Oh, I was wrong," but we know that that's not how most decisions are made. It's clear. I mean, the role of emotion, it's just a feeling, a sense, a gut is enough to sway people most of the time. Okay, yeah, the system 2 will kick in. Facts and figures and logical thinking does kick in occasionally for certain categories, but not many categories, and not often.
I was listening to a Mark Ritzen's Creativity is Not Enough webinar yesterday, and one of the things he mentioned was, like, if you just open up your fridge and look at the products in there and think about why you bought them, most of the time there's not really a good explanation, like, other than that you needed mayonnaise, or I needed
you needed exactly. And yes, exactly. And it's like, well, why? Well, the biggest driver is, I bought it last time.
It wasn't terrible.
I know it's not rubbish. Yeah, exactly. I know it's not terrible. I bought it last time. I was busy. I was rushing around the supermarket.
It was available.
I was the example I was given. I've got to collect the kids in 20 minutes. I mean, So what do? I'm not going to think about every purchase. Why would I bother? What's the point? It's not that interesting. It's not important. Whether or not my daughter got the prize for best kid. I've forgotten the titles in primary school these days, but you know what I mean. There are so many other things that people are thinking about. Yeah. So just. And actually, they probably didn't give it much thought. And if their the product they bought last time wasn't there, they'll just pick some other one that's vaguely familiar quickly.
So if marketing doesn't work by creating demand and persuading people to switch products, or advertising specifically, how does it really work?
I think the best way to think about it, for me anyway, is it works by just feeling like the most obvious choice when you need or want something, because it comes to your mind first and powerfully. You see what I mean? Just the brain is really biased, right? The mind is very biased, because we think that as soon as we think of something, have a need, a desire, or whatever, the first thing that comes into our mind is probably right. It's stupid. I mean, there's no logic to that, but it's kind of an evolutionary beneficial thing to do, because it means you can make quick decisions. Do you sort of? So I know this is. So in other words, if we think I need to replace my, what did you say, butter? I need some more butter. If we think automatically, Anchor's still a big brand here. Do you have Anchor in Canada?
No. I'm a weirdo though. I'm like lactose free, so I.
You're a niche categorical way. That's fine.
You're special, Mark.
All right, look, you can edit this and put in the name of the biggest dairy
That's
brand.
fine. No,
we're
that's
going
fine.
with Anchor.
Yeah.
We're going with Anchor.
Yeah, but the point is, whatever comes to mind powerfully and quickly, the brain we just think that's probably a good answer. And unless it's overruled by something quickly, by system 2, very rare, you go, okay, that's probably right. So in other words, if something comes to mind really quickly and easily and powerfully when we have a need, we have a massive bias towards that. It doesn't mean we'll choose it every time. That's fine. There are other factors, especially for considered purchases, but it's a massive bias. So just being super salient, super mentally available, all these words, they mean similar things when people are thinking about what to buy. That is the role of advertising is to boost that, and can be extremely effective at doing that if it triggers emotions and gets you to remember it.
So, and I think that last part, the emotions, I think is probably something that's overlooked too much. I would argue, you brought up butter. When I first moved out by myself, university and stuff like that, I tried to emulate what my mother had in her fridge. Because if it worked for my mother, then it's got to work for me. Like, I'm not going to overcomplicate it. So I went and got the same butter she would buy, the same ketchup she would buy, etc. Because that was familiar. There was also an emotional connection to that as well. I hadn't formed my own opinions on some of these brands in the context of like, which ketchup or which butter. And I think the emotional response that we get in the moment sometimes, like I said, I think is often overlooked, but these things are built early on as well. Like if it's a cereal, if it's milk, if it's some of these things that it's just what's in the house as you're growing up, that's what becomes familiar. That's what you create an emotional connection to.
Yeah. And that's why brands work in the long term, not just 2, 3, 5 years, the advertising can build an effect over a couple of years, 3 years, whatever, but a lifetime of experiences. And that's why very big brands can stay big as long as they keep refreshing those things. Because of, like you said, just familiarity, reassurance, very powerful emotions. And if Kellogg's, you have Kellogg's, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, I assume. It's Kellogg's. Okay.
We got to bring you out here, man.
I know. Well, I'm coming over to Vancouver actually in November. So.
Oh wow.
Well, hey,
where are you guys based?
We're 40 minutes.
Yeah, we're a couple of mountain passes away.
45-minute flight away, almost.
Or 10-hour drive.
In the UK, it's like, that's the other side of the world. But in your world, I suppose, a couple of mountains away? What, we don't know? That's Scotland. So, okay.
Well,
anyway, look, it'd be great to meet up if we can.
Yeah.
I was going to mention that after we stop recording, but fine.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So, so I will come over and I'll see Kellogg's in the shops like I've seen everywhere else. Yeah, cool. So if Kellogg's comes to mind when you buy some cereal, it has to be over to not buy Kellogg's. You need some pretty powerful, new, compelling something to stop you to decide to buy some new brand.
Yeah. So there's a couple of core concepts I want to start digging into that you've outlined in your book. Because I had this brain fart yesterday where I was telling V, we were interviewing somebody and I had so many questions that popped in my head at once. My brain short circuited. I almost just had that again now because I was going to ask one question, which I do want to ask, which is, you have this idea before we get into all the concepts, this idea that you talked about how advertising really works is about reminding people of what the product is and when to, when a category purchase opportunity comes up to remember that product. And it's kind of simple, but then you get into business meetings and people are, explaining what marketing is, and everyone's got an opinion about how advertising works. And then you get into these conversations where it's so convoluted and complex, and not at all the way you described it here. Like there's math that people start throwing out, drive top funnel all the way through lower funnel, all kinds of activities and tactics along the way. Are we overcomplicating what advertising is and how it works?
Yes, we probably are overcomplicating it. I was looking up some quotes this morning to try and illustrate some advertising and marketing concepts, and I thought a brilliant one. Albert Einstein comes up with so many. He came up with so many quotes. It's ridiculous. He's one of them. I think the quote was along the lines of, "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." I thought that's a good one. In other words, if you really understand it, it becomes a little bit simpler and a bit easier to explain and to act upon. But I think that's kind of unfair because it is complex. There's a lot going on. And a typical marketer is exposed to so many conflicting ideas and so much data and so much terminology. It becomes hard to navigate. And once you've lost, you've kind of lost the plot a little bit. It's very difficult to get you back. And again, this is a plug for my books, but that's what I try and do. I absolutely try and keep it simple, keep it really clear, and connect things up so that you can build a mental model quite in an easy way that helps you. I think that the concept I find most useful is to think of, okay, we're talking about brands here. We're talking about memory. We're talking about what comes to mind when people are thinking about buying something, which is memory, and understanding that brands, like anything else in the brain, it's just a collection of mental associations. What comes to mind, literally, the things that fire. And I think that can really help. I'm going to football. The Euros have recently finished when we're recording this.
Yep.
And England lost. So I'm not bitter. But I did
Sorry.
I am bitter. I liked some of the advertising that Walker's Crisps did in the UK.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole campaign. And it was quite simple, really. And they had Thierry Henry and David Beckham sitting on a sofa, and they're watching the football, not explicitly the Euros, but clearly the Euros, and they'd run out of their Walker's Crisps. So David Beckham gets upset or whatever. You need to watch this ad. It's better than I'm describing it. But Thierry Henry says, "Okay, I'll go and find some crisps." They go out to the neighbours. Obviously, because it's in Beckham's house, the neighbours are about 2 miles away, 10 miles away, I don't know. And they go around and say, "Have you got any Walkers?" And obviously the joke is that if they've got a pack of Walkers in their house, and a lot of people do in Britain, it's a big brand, right? They then can bring them and sit and watch the football with these two superstars. And it's quite fun. It's quite sweet. It's all right. And I was thinking, how does that actually work? Actually, I think how it works is Walkers are already associated with Gary Lineker, the footballer. They've used him in UK advertising for decades, and therefore football, because he's been the football pundit and TV presenter since he retired, etc. And then they've got these two other famous footballers, so there's a connection with football. And the advertising makes you think of and realise and remember that Walkers is a great thing to eat when you're watching a football. It's a TV snack. So that whole thing is designed, I believe, to create a strong link between the brand and the category entry point of snacking when you watch TV. Using football as the illustration of that. I'm thinking, well, that's really clever. You can think about it as just building some fame for the brand and notoriety for the brand, but it's better than that. It actually makes you think of the consumption moment, which I imagine is one of the bigger category entry points for crisps. Which is eating in front of the TV. I do all the time, so I'm sure it's not just me.
Yeah. Also, there's the other. I mean, you could break that into a few different category entry points, which is I'm out of snacks. I need to get something else.
Say again. You're out of snacks.
I'm out of snacks, so I need to get more.
I need to get more. I have to have snacks in the house.
Yeah. So there's football and the link to that. Then there's David Beckham and the link to the Walkers, and then Thierry Henry and the link to Walkers. and then, you know, I'm out of snacks, go ask the neighbors, but, you know, go to the store, whatever that ends
Yeah,
up
exactly.
being.
And actually, at the same time, I noticed when I was driving back the other day that there was these at the petrol station. There were these massive facings of Walker's big bags as well, you know, in the store,
Mm-hmm.
which of course interact. It's like, oh yeah. I need that because the football's on.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Clever.
Yeah, that's a great example. Sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to
No,
cut
go
you
for it.
off. I was just going to say that was another great example because you also talked about the association of walkers to David Linker. So that's going back even further to saying like this is something that's been, maybe call it a brand asset that we've leaned on for, you know, for X amount of years. So it's still staying core to what they had already built mental availability against.
Exactly.
And then just built on that. So like really doubling down on that. And I love that example because I think all too often we probably try to squirrel and do things new for the sake of doing something new when we may have something in the archives that there's already been a really high mental availability built up that we can just bring back and continue to build on.
Building's the right word. That's why brand building is the right phrase, because you're building on existing mental connections. Because if you fire existing connections, when you say, for example, experiencing an ad, it can link to it. It's literally how the brain works. How Pavlov explained, helped us understand how the brain works. So it's absolutely brilliant. And you're right. And also on the packs themselves, they have pictures of Gary Lineker on one of the packs. They used to call about Sultan Lineker. A very bad joke.
Oh, no way.
That kind of
That's
thing.
funny.
Yeah. And then they have Thierry Henry and David Beckham on different packs. So again, like I say, they haven't used Lineker in recent ads, these ads.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But they're building on football, walkers,
totally.
eating, slacking. It's how the brain works. It's clever.
Yeah.
We just had Ella Ward on, who's one of the research scientists at Ehrenberg Bass Institute, who focuses on product packaging. And so we were talking about the connection, how important it is for advertising to match the packaging. And what you just described was like creating all these flashbacks for me.
I had the same thing. I had a big debate. I'm going way back here, so sorry, this is like ancient history.
Keep going.
A lot of your listeners, but there was a disconnect I felt between PG Tips, which is the biggest brand still, I think, of tea in the UK. So actually one of the biggest brands in Britain because tea is so popular. And on the pack, it has obviously the name PG Tips and then a picture of someone in probably India or Sri Lanka or somewhere picking the leaves, picking the tips, picking the tea. It's been there on the pack for ages, but they're advertising for decades in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Featured chimps, not monkeys. Sorry, don't want to get it wrong. My mic would kill me if I said that chimps are monkeys. Apes in the advertising, right? And it was very memorable. It was very funny, but obviously it had to go in the kind of 90s because it was inappropriate to use animals in that way. Whatever, yeah, fine. But and I agree with that. But the point was there wasn't a lot of connection with the pack, right? So those advertising memories were good and powerful, but they were missing a trick, I think, in not having a connection with the pack. Whereas the Tetley, the second biggest brand, Tetley Tea, had the Tetley Tea Folk, these wonderful flat cap wearing northern characters, cartoon characters, in the advertising, and they put them on the pack. So they actually had them featuring on the pack. Now that makes more sense because you wouldn't necessarily want a chimp on a food brand. So, but anyway, the mix, the integration between the advertising and the packaging was much, much stronger. And at one point, Tetley did actually overtake PG Tips around that time. I don't know if, I haven't followed the category since then, so I don't know. I was thinking, this is a big important point. I must remember that one and do a case study about it 25 years later.
So, so let's talk about the ads themselves, advertising themselves. So when we get into some of the concepts that you've got, let's start with reach versus frequency.
Easy.
All frequency all the time.
All the frequency.
Obviously, no, of course, reach, because Of course, reach. I mean, I know there are exceptional circumstances where you might want to create a lot of noise at a short space of time, and that requires frequency. Yeah, okay. But 99 times out of 100, you're going to get a better overall return from your investment if you focus on reach amongst your category buyers. Certainly in the long term.
But so that, I mean, as simple as that sounds, you dig a little bit further, scratch the surface a bit. I mean, a lot of performance marketing is based off of high frequency tactics.
Is it though? What do you mean? I mean, yes, a lot of digital marketing ends up with high frequencies,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a fundamental principle here, which is that, you know, the difference in the effect on someone between the 9th and the 10th time they see something
Mm-hmm.
is very, 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 very small compared to the difference between seeing it no times and one time or one time and two times, right?
Mm-hmm.
The diminishing returns. So it's the absolutely proven that that's the case. So you always got to have that in mind. So if you've got a strategy that reaches, you know, a certain proportion of people 40 times, 50 times, 1,000 times when it comes to Royal Match when I'm playing Scrabble Go, but it doesn't matter. No, it does matter. I've seen the same brand advertised to me 1,000 times or more.
Yeah.
I will not buy it. Okay, this isn't about me. But the point is, you know.
Now you're infuriated.
Yeah,
I'm not buying it.
No, this is a tangent, right? But I think at some point we need to start to do studies about whether the high frequencies become so irritating that they actively mean you will never buy that brand, which is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
That's a good point.
but back to the point is, but the fundamental principle is that, well, unless for whatever weird reason it costs you the same or less to have higher frequencies because of the way it's bought. Yeah, okay. If that's the case, then maybe, as long as it doesn't irritate people. Yeah, then maybe. But I can't understand a world where you don't pay, you pay less for having higher frequency. But maybe that's the case. I don't know.
It's interesting, and thanks for double clicking into that, Mark, a little bit, because I was sitting through a meeting, I want to say a couple of weeks ago, and there was like a post-campaign report, and then the agents really wanted to highlight the frequency side. It's like, I think it was like 14 times or whatever the number was. And in that moment, I always raise my hand, like, can you help me understand if this is the right thing to do though? Why 14? Why isn't it 5? Why isn't it 2? Why 14?
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting to try to hear how they justified the 14 times. But I'm with you, Dan. Like it really go ahead. Go.
It bugs me. It bugs me because it's like as if there is a magic number. No, actually, you know, we have a certain pot of money. Look, for now, let's assume you've got a certain pot of money. To maximize that effect, I want as many people as possible to be reached with that pot of money. And if I'm choosing a channel where people are watching, seeing it 14 times in a, we'll come back to the time frame, by the way, but 4 times in a space of time, I'm thinking, well, could I have spent less and used that to reach some different people once or twice?
Totally.
And that's what you've got to think. It's not. It's all about how you allocate that money and maximize the reach. So I'm passionate about, you know, how do you reach as many people as possible, different people as possible with that money? Because it's a myth. I was told when I first entered marketing as a CMO that people need to see 7 times an ad 7 times before they act on it. That's completely not true. There's no evidence for that. This is where the evidence base is really important. There is zero evidence for that. There is a tiny bit of evidence that if it's a completely unknown brand, that people need to kind of get familiar with it. So, you know, more than 1 or 2 exposures is good. You know what I mean? Well, they start to think, oh, okay, this is a real thing. But apart from that, it's just not true. You know, there's no scientific evidence for that. In fact, all of the evidence suggests that the first exposures has the biggest effect, the second has the second biggest effect, the third has the third biggest effect. And actually, frequency is just a function of reach. You know, if you want to reach more people, you will inevitably, in almost every channel, have to put up with, the way I think about it, higher frequency levels. But it's not something to be proud of or happy about. It's just a byproduct. It's a side effect of the fact you want to reach. So I just think, no, I'm not listening. I just want to know how many people have I reached at least once for my money. If it's not enough, I'm going to spend it somewhere else or whatever, Anyway,
Yeah.
you can see how passionate I am about this because I think one of the biggest fallacies in marketing,
Yeah.
in my opinion. Yeah.
V, take the next one.
All right. Broad reach versus narrow targeting.
Well, we've done that. No, we haven't done that. Okay. Now there is a nuance.
But almost, a little bit different, I think.
It's a little bit different. Yeah, no. It's simple. I think it's really good practice for your brand to have broad reach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that could be through advertising that focuses on some sort of overarching brand value or perception or image or
even just category.
Yes. So you reach a broad section of your total audience, which could be either everyone who buys the category or a broad, a large chunk of, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah? Like Walkers might be like Walkers are chips or crisps.
Yeah, so anyone who buys crisps,
UK
I would, chips. Yeah, chips is different. They're fries.
Yeah, fries. Yeah,
no, crisps, chips, whatever you call them. They, yes, everyone who buys that. In fact, probably I would say Walkers is anyone who buys snacks.
Right.
Yeah, because those crisps will compete with peanuts and other things. So,
right.
And actually, one of the best ways because Walkers is the brand leader, one of the best ways it can grow is by making more people decide that crisps are something they should buy regularly all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's slightly irrelevant because I think in the UK, literally everyone eats crisps. Mm-hmm. You can imagine. Okay, fine. That's the board, and that's what the Walkers brand should aim to. And its advertising should try and reach as many of those people as possible in totality across all of its advertising, including the one we saw, which was the one I described earlier, which is clearly a brand ad, right? As in trying to build the overall brand and a big association, which is just a snacking moment.
Yeah.
It wasn't trying to do put the small packet of crisp in the lunchbox for the kids moment, but you can imagine there's going to be a halo effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you've got crisp in the house, especially, depending on the format. Right.
Yeah.
When it comes to specific products and specific category entry points, like put, an essential ingredient for your lunchbox that you send your kids off to school with, or for a picnic, or those ones. That's where I think you might do better to do much more targeted, narrow advertising that tries to get the right people at the right moment when they're in the category. They're in the moment when they are the category.
So parents in that case that are making kids lunches.
That's right. So not single people, parents who do that. Parents with kids. That's parents.
That's just parents.
That's just parents.
Yeah, and if you can find a channel or channels where that's what they're thinking about, that's what they're doing. They're trying to find things to give their kids for the next week. They're like, fine. And I'm sure that in some categories you can find an even more laser sharp channel that gets the people at the moment. I think it's more important to think about the moment when they're likely to be buying for that category entry point reason.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse the bad language, the bad grammar. Yeah, not bad language. I wasn't swearing. Then that's bad. Then that can work. And even then, there's a debate about whether that's actually worth the money. If you have to spend a lot more money to get to those
exactly,
and that's where actually even then it might not be worth it. It might be better to do it a bit broader and at a lot lower cost.
And this is where I think, like, as you're saying that, I'm picturing myself shopping for snacks for my kids at the grocery store, and they love goldfish. Do you have goldfish there?
I think you can get them, but I bought them when I was in the States. So
okay. So just little crackers that are shaped like fish, and then there's all different kinds. They love them. My kids love them. And I wouldn't necessarily think to get Walker's chips. We don't have them here, but let's say we did have Walker's chips here. I wouldn't necessarily think to put Walker's chips in the bag, because usually the snack aisle is, where the crackers are and where the granola bars are and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So this is where it's a team effort, I think, for walkers to go, we need to find a way to put our product on the shelf in the snack aisle, not just in the chip aisle.
Absolutely. And that, I don't know, in the UK, that they have two aisles, because we snack I don't know if we snack more than the Canadians, but I think we probably do. And they have one which is like big, massive bags that you buy for the whole family, and you pull them out.
family
Yeah,
packs.
yeah, family packs. Right. And then in a different aisle, actually, they have the multi-packs of small packs, multi-packs of the little individual portions, which are more for, like we said, for different occasion, which is often the kids in the lunch boxes and stuff like that. But that's why. So that, we talked about targeting. It's more tightly targeting around a category entry point. That's also product format specific, where you also promote and advertise the most appropriate format for that.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
I've been criticizing this thinking a lot over the last few months, with huge debates on LinkedIn, about STP, segmentation,
targeting position. Yeah.
And first is alternative ways of thinking about this, and trying to understand. Okay, this is how we should think about positioning of a brand versus more specific marketing of products and category entry points and media.
Just the one last thing before we move on to the next one, on broad reach and narrow targeting, usually, and this is maybe not universally applied, but usually what happens is when you're going too narrow, you're actually paying more for those data sets as well. But the duplication that exists across the audiences crossing over to all these other segments is quite large. And I think you actually may be doing yourself a disservice going too narrow in some instances, while you can still keep it relatively broad, still reaching more households. And I keep going back. We had Nicole Hartnett on, and she said, if you had $2, you're going to invest $2 on 2 households versus 1 household twice. Full stop.
Yep.
And that for me is was a big aha moment, because I think that's where, even when I think about broad reach and narrow targeting, that you still should be erring on the side of broad reach in more cases than not.
I think that's right. And I think we need to try and figure out how to get the balance right. And there will be a balance, but I agree with you completely that actually currently everything is too narrow and too focused, and we're paying too much for that narrowness, I think. And I think start with broad, and then, if you're going to go narrow, is that better value? You have to say, okay, how many households are we going to reach? How many we're not going to reach? How much more are we paying for that? How much more effect would it have than actually if we went broader? How much more benefit do we get by trying to be more focused in our messaging for the ads that go to that group more? Will that make much difference? When you look at if you do, it's really mathematical, actually. You have to do the sums. You have to do estimates of these things, which it's not easy at all. But whenever I've done it, the broader version tended to be better.
Yeah.
In the long run, certainly.
The other one that I had here is budget, setting budget. I think I think that's what the percentage of revenue reference was. There's like a common thing, I would say most people have heard 5% of a total revenue should be allocated to marketing. And it's a rule of thumb. I don't know if anybody, I know there's a lot of evidence. I know you've looked at it. What's your take on that?
Yeah, there is data that does suggest that, and different, not just one data set, but several data sets that suggest that companies that spend approximately 5 to 10% of their revenue on advertising that tend to maximize their return from that in advertising investment. That they tend to get the best returns from that.
Yeah.
I've got sources I can send a link to. It kind of makes sense that as you spend above those kind of figures, high amounts, you're going to get a lower return.
Yeah.
This is what we talked about, diminishing returns. The first few dollars you spend are going to have a big impact. The last few dollars you spend are going to have a lower incremental effect. So yes, you can imagine. So hence the curve that's on the website, on the graph that I put on the website. So So there will come a point where if you spend, I don't know, depending on your business and lots of detail about your business, 15%, 20%, or whatever, 30%, there'll be a point where it becomes bad value. Right. Additional dollars spent will not give you a good return anymore.
Right.
That's pretty clear. But of course, it varies a lot. Like if you've got a really, really good product that's better than the competitors, then actually that you can spend more and it'll still be a good return because each person who buys it is probably going to love it and buy it forever. I'm simplifying. Yeah. So that will vary. Yeah. And it varies again, like we said, on the size of the brand. The bigger the brand you are, the bigger your revenue, then again, you can actually spend more and it'll give you a better return for longer. That's fine. What I find intriguing is the fact that if you spend 0 to 5% of your revenue, you tend not to get a good return. Because in theory, if you just think about diminishing returns, then people who spend almost nothing, very little of their revenue, should have a fantastic return. But I think there are lots of theories as to why that is. But I think it's probably because if you spend almost nothing on advertising, you don't get very good at it. And you don't get very good agencies. And you don't get very good advice. And you don't get very good deals from the media company or the media buying side. So I think we could, that kind of makes sense. You're not really serious about advertising and you're not good at it. So it's only it's a rule of thumb as a start. It's a start point for a discussion about how much. And don't forget, there's the other whole equation, which is the Binet and Field data that suggests that in a competitive market, and let's face it, most markets are competitive, where lots of brands or most brands advertise. If your share of advertising spend is less than your share of market, you could be in trouble.
Yeah.
You're more likely on average to decline. So, if you want to be competitive, you're going to have to match, your spend is going to have to match your size at least.
And I think that's where a lot of this stuff links together. Like we're talking about these as separate, but they are interconnected, right? Like
absolutely.
Your reach versus frequency. If you have a limited budget, well, everybody's got a limited budget, but if it was a small budget, you want to definitely maximize your reach with that budget. That might mean you need a narrow targeting group. Like it could be a geographic narrowing so that your share of voice is higher in your limited, even if you're a single store, a mom and pop shop or, let's say a men's clothing outlet or something like that. That has one location. You want to target everything around your immediate proximity rather than trying to compete with, like, say, some of the big department stores that are advertising everywhere across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a scaling thing here, isn't there? And also it's to do with you can advertise beyond more widely, but if the people you advertise to can't easily access your product, your service, then that advertising is going to be wasted. The mental availability and physical availability equation, they have to go hand in hand. Otherwise, because physical availability, people don't tend to go out of their way to buy something, or very rarely do. So unless it's easily available, then the people who've been advertised to will it's just a complete waste.
Yeah.
Okay, we had one last core concept there: phasing your spend versus bursts. In the market, out of the market. Always on versus campaign moments.
Yeah, okay. It's similar to what we talked about before, I suppose. But again, there's a default I think is quite useful, which is that the more you spread out your spend, all other things being equal, and we'll talk about the exceptions in a minute, but you get better ROI if you spread your spend out over the long term. And one of the key reasons for that, again, goes back to a core principle of diminishing returns, because we talked about how the 9th to 10th exposure is trivial impact compared with the 1st to 2nd, etc.
Yeah,
that's true up to a point, but it's within a space of time. Because actually, if you there's a long gap, if you have a long gap between exposures, people's memories fade. So that 9th to 10th exposure becomes almost like a 1st to 2nd exposure if you haven't contacted them for 6 months. In other words, where you waste money is having high levels of frequency of exposure to people in a short space of time. That's where the real problems lie. And that's why a lot of the big advertisers set limits, especially digital, to say, I don't want people to see this ad more than, say, twice per week. Cap it.
Right.
And I think but they do want it to see more than twice per year. They just want it spread out so that you get better value. Because, if they haven't seen it for a few weeks and then they see it again, it'll still have an effect, because you've got to allow for the decay. Memories naturally decay. And everything, including advertising. So you still need those frequencies over the year, but you don't need frequencies over the week, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Therefore, I know it's quite a complex sort of line of argument, but it does mean that on average, for a given budget, you do better to spread it out across the whole year rather than shoving it all into January and February. Is the key principle. That this is where you have to, of course, there will be exceptions. Like, well, supposing most of your category is bought in January or February, fine. Then that's So seasonality of purchase of the category is overrules it, or is an equally important factor. Yeah. So sure. There are things like that. But as a default, spread it out should give you better returns. And the data does also support that, the findings.
Yeah.
Love it.
That's really good. We had about 600 other questions for you, but we're not going to have time to get through them all. But this is really good. It means these are some of the things that people make choices on every day without necessarily realizing there is even a choice, I think. And one of the things your book does so well is articulates these concepts and these ideas clearly with visuals that are really well done. Really easy to understand, and provides the links and the references if you want to dig in further. But it was such a good reference tool, I would call it. I mean, it's a book, but it's a reference tool. You could have it at the side of your desk and just oh, what about frequency? And look up something about frequency and see.
It's meant to be. I like the phrase that someone used, which is a field guide. It's a field guide. It's a,
field guide, wayfinder.
We used to have the Observer book off. I guess Observer was a UK publication, so you've probably not seen these. But as a kid, I used to love the Observer Guide to automobiles, the Observer Guide to birds,
right?
etc. And this is kind of like that. In fact, I wish I had one to show you. I don't think I've still got any in my, because they're also small and small, compact, mini size, like the books. And it's the way I've designed them is so that you can.
They're moleskin kind of books, right?
That's right. They're exactly the same size. In fact, the original versions even had that nice little thing for holding your pen in. Unfortunately, times have had to change, but the concept's the same. And it's meant to be. What do I think about frequency? What do I think about? What do I need to consider when making a choice about? I try not to be too. I'm more directive actually in these podcasts than I am to some extent in the book. But they're meant to be the factors you need to take into account, for any type of decision in advertising.
It's so good.
So basically, what you're saying is, when people buy the books, make sure they come and listen to this podcast.
Yeah, because then they'll get the kind of
the
unedited version. The director's cut.
The director's cut.
Before my publishers have, softened it or whatever. No, that's not true. They don't. They're really good.
Dan, how can people find out more about you and the things you're working on?
I put a lot of energy to keeping my website up to date. So that is smartmarketing.me. Quite easy.
It's also a great website.
And that's full of. I haven't added them up, but I think it's at least 300 or so, or 400 illustrations these days, because I add a couple a week over the last years. So that's a good way. The other way, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I mean, I love LinkedIn, and it's the easiest way to get hold of me. People say I can't get you by WhatsApp or phone, but I can just message you on LinkedIn, and you'll respond straight away. So LinkedIn, and the best way is just search for Dan White Smart Marketing or something like that. I think technically I'm down by 1,000, which isn't that impressive, is it? But
Talk about personal branding.
I know, exactly. I don't want that. I wanted something more unique, but I don't know how to do it. Anyway, yeah, so LinkedIn is a good bet as well.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Dan, thanks so much for this. This has been great.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me again.
You're a legend, my friend.
I'm going to have to go to UK just to go try some of those Walker's chips at some point too.
They're very good. It's part of the it's just part of PepsiCo though, so it's the same as Lay's. Do you have Lay's?
Yeah,
Do you?
yeah.
Well, that's not fun.
I know. Sorry, it's boring, isn't it? How you know it's
okay? I'm
Lay's?
not going to the UK.
What's the point? You know.
I'm not going to the UK to have Lay's.
No, I know, but they the UK team are good. The marketing team is really good. They are genuinely
Yeah, that's right.
properly good. So yeah.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Dan.
No worries. All right, speak to you soon, guys.
If you like this show, please leave a review. And even if you didn't, we'd love to make this show better, and your feedback will help us do that. Bada bang, bada boom.
Bada bing, bada boom.
I don't know why I've been doing that lately. Like, it seems...
You're 2 for 2.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe that's just your new sign-in call, man. That's okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
And joining us from Calgary, Alberta, bada bing, bada boom, Mark Binkley. Hey? No?
Yeah, let's go with that. And now it sounds ridiculous. But anyway, Dan White.
Dan White.
Legend.
Love the guy.
Yeah, he's so good. His books really genuinely are awesome.
And technically here, I was just on Amazon. You can't get it yet till September 17th on Amazon.
Okay.
But honestly, like a team, like I'm talking to my team, it's like everybody that's listening, these smart guide books that he's put out, like smart marketing, smart advertising, smart branding, these are great books that have a lot of the current literature around our industry. And they're not very expensive. I would suggest everyone buy them. They're phenomenal.
Yeah. They are. I don't know what keeps happening, but my screen just zooms in super big and I have the stop button that's only visible. And I can't see you. I don't know what happened. It's just weird. Anyway, let's fix that. So what were some of your big takeaways from this, V?
That's a good question. I have a few takeaways. I love that we went through all the core concepts, kind of almost like in a this or that kind of format, which was good. I think for me, where I'd want to start is first around like the misconceptions about how ads work. You know, the notion that we can't generate demand, and that we were talking to Dale about this very thing.
Yeah,
had a great conversation with him about it, and I think there is this ongoing perception that we do generate demand. The reality is we don't. The second was the notion of just being able to convert people naturally from one brand to another. Sometimes it's just very circumstantial. And the only thing that you can control is your ability to maintain or create that mental availability. So if there at some point do need to make another choice, that you become top of mind to do so, but you're not actively converting people, which is also an interesting take as well.
Yeah, and I agree. I think there's so much about the simplicity. I love what he said about, the Einstein quote, if you can't explain something simply, you probably don't understand it well.
Yeah.
It's true in a lot of ways. And when it, in this conversation, it can be very complicated. And I think with marketing, especially, or advertising, there's so many levers and widgets and gadgets and whiz bang things in the platforms that we get. Yeah. Kapow.
Kapow.
Shazam. Kablooey. Bada bing, bada boom. There's a whole bunch of that. Yeah. Gobbledygook. But there's new ad units, new targeting tools, new everything, new UTM parameters, you name it. There's everything. And so you get caught up in a lot of this stuff and then ignore the big picture of what it is we're trying to do and how it actually works. And the consumer who doesn't give a shit about any of that stuff.
Totally.
Who is sitting at a store looking for a snack to put in their kids'
Walkers
lunch. Yeah. So it's really interesting because we get caught up in a lot of the fancy stuff. And the basics are really the most powerful things. Like we have to work with product. We have to work with distribution,
Packaging.
yeah, packaging, all that to make all of this work that much better.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think making sure that we still apply that simple, like again, when we went through the core concepts, if you realize like every choice that he made was like the easier of the two to do. Reach versus narrow targeting, which is easier? Just broad reach, right? It's just easier to do. What was the other one here? Just quickly off the top of my head. Reach versus frequency. Again, reach is going to be easier. Phasing your spend versus bursts. Having always on is just easier to do versus trying to time it perfectly to have a specific burst in market. Like, yes, there's going to be nuances, but that just goes to show you that we shouldn't be complicating things.
Yeah, but you know what? I there's so many. I don't disagree with you, but there are a lot of natural assumptions of how we do things that these decisions actually aren't easier. Like, for example, I was talking to a media buyer recently, and they're like, we should phase this in, put a burst up when we first launch, so that we make a splash. I'm like, well, I think we should divide the budget by 12 months. We don't have that much. I'd rather have an ability to reach people throughout the year because I don't know when people are signing up. And so I'm coming at it from having read a lot of the stuff that Dan's published and everyone else and all that kind of stuff. That other person was coming at it from a point of view of this just is how we do things, which is
makes for a good
in a
debate.
lot of ways an immovable object.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that's just how we do. Like, it is how we do things a lot of times.
But in the example of doing a burst up front, which we've all done at some point, you still have a level of budget to maintain or sustain for the rest of the duration. In this case, say call it a year. So I think that's where, again, it's, and there's going to be different. Sorry, Jesus. No, I can't speak. Different opinions on a lot of this stuff. But as long as you're rooting it in evidence,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what has to be your almost like your trump cards. Like, okay, we're all entitled to opinions, but what does the science say? What does evidence say? It says this.
Yeah. And I think maybe this is some of the burst stuff where that comes from is in the brand building side, where you've got traditional tactics would say, let's say you had $100 budget. I maybe spend 20 or $30. Let's just say $30 on creative. I have $70 left over
for media.
So what am I going to do with that? Well, I might, because of priorities, need to focus on narrow targeting for specific things. I might need to focus on some of that performance marketing. So let's say I spent 25% on narrow targeting and segments, 25% on performance marketing, lower funnel stuff. I've now got, if I did the math right, $20 left over for a brand to support the brand campaign that I already spent $30 on the budget, or of my budget on the creative. So I'm now spending less on media than I am on the creative. And now I'm going to go, okay, well, I'm going to blast this to as many people as I can in a week period. Yeah. Which is, I mean, it's maybe, I mean, a lot of people would disagree with the math I just put out, but it's just an example more to illustrate, like, there's a whole bunch of choices in there that we probably need to think more carefully about.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. What stood out for you? What else?
I think for me, like the transparency that he had around, the more he spent time thinking about how it works, the less he actually knows, or the more questions he has. He didn't say the less he knows, I don't think, but the more questions he has about actually how it works. Yeah. It was really refreshing because I genuinely, have gone through that thing myself, and I question more about how this works today than I ever had in my career. Mm-hmm. It sounds like with all the examples you have, it's a similar experience too. Like you're asking more questions of like the metrics that are being reported and the reports that you're getting.
Yeah.
And so I it's easy to say, oh yeah, marketing is going to just be this strong force that's going to force people to create demand, and it's going to convert people from one product over to another. And the reality is much more nuanced than that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's important for advertisers and marketers in general to be honest with like setting expectations around what advertising can and cannot do.
Yeah. You know, I'm not purposely trying to make this about my journey here, but I think what's interesting is the more time, and you brought this up a couple podcasts ago, and I think a lot for me really changed because of this podcast, and because now you're almost allocating time to get closer to the literature as we're preparing for interviews, as we're just naturally being more immersed around it, that it's given me a different level of confidence to either defend a point of view, challenge a point of view, and whatever that is in the moment. And I think for me, what it becomes is like for all of us is the more you spend time trying to understand something about our discipline, naturally you're going to just open up more this peripheral vision on all other things as well. And I don't know, maybe this is just me, but yeah, I know that I carry myself and I approach conversations a lot differently than I ever have in my career now.
Yeah, to me it's like the Wayne Gretzky analogy of the game slowed down. I think as Wayne Gretzky, like when you have this, and we were talking yesterday about Colin Powell's the interview we had with him, how he had said the model plus the manager is more effective than either the model on its own or the manager on its own. And so the more you understand the models, and Dan mentioned this a little bit, there's a lot of conflicting models out there.
Yeah.
The more you learn about that stuff, and the more you dig into the references, especially like what is the proof behind this? Not just that somebody published it. That's not proof. That there is references that you can link back to and find the source data and all that kind of stuff. The more you select for well-referenced ideas and models, the more you understand those, the slower the game gets.
Yes.
Right. And then the more time you have to make decisions rather than panicking and feeling like, because I did that a lot at the beginning of my career.
Yeah.
I felt panicked all the time, trying to just react and respond to be agile and, and do things because people were asking me to do things. Whereas now it's kind of like, no, I can ask a few questions too, because there's, answers that I might have based on the models that I now know.
Yeah.
That are, and questions that I might actually have that are new and different. So it's a little bit slower and I can anticipate other questions that might come up.
I love what you just said there. The game has slowed down now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. Well, thanks, V. Thanks.
Yeah, man.
The other one that I thought stuck out for me is he talked about how marketing hasn't really got, or advertising hasn't really got meaningfully better, which is kind of like a problem. And what came to mind when he was saying that was, at least in Canada, engineers have the iron ring. And it was, I might be butchering this, but it was intended, there was a bridge that collapsed. And so all engineers from that moment of time forward were given iron rings as not a memento, but like a recognition of a moment in time when this bridge collapsed, and that was part of their responsibility. And so it's like kind of never again kind of thing. So a way to get better. And that's kind of what came to mind with this. And, books aren't always the answer, but there are well-referenced books, well-referenced literature, all that kind of stuff. It's in a way, a way to get a version of an iron ring, like having this insight and this knowledge.
Yeah.
For marketing, I think is valuable. I don't know how to like turn that into something. Maybe we come up with rings.
maybe we
sell some merch.
Let's. I like that idea.
Selling some merch.
Selling merch. And I think, again, when we think about our discipline, though, it's such a subjective one, which I think also creates this level of obscurity in some instances, right? Because everyone can have an opinion.
Yeah.
I can't have an opinion on how to build a bridge because I've never built one, so I'm not even going to try. Right?
Popsicle sticks, maybe.
Yeah, that's right. I have done a
grade
popsicle
4,
stick.
something like that.
I did do that. And yes, my bridge won. But
wow.
Maybe I was an engineer in another life. I have no idea.
No.
But I just his way around explaining things, Dan, his illustrations, he's been able to simplify a lot of these models, a lot of these concepts into very like easy way of digesting it. It's almost like snackable content in a way. Like if these books were an app, you would just be like scrolling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just a great resource. Full stop.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great resource. Like I have 2 of them right now, just waiting for the third one to actually be released here in Canada to pick up through Amazon. But yeah, they're good. Okay, buddy. Well, let's wrap. As they say in Hollywood. Oh, that was supposed I don't know what that was. There was a glitch in the mic. I'm just kidding.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Here comes the emphasis button.
Oh, poor Mark. You got this, buddy. Anyways.
Whoa, I never used the mute button so much in my life.
This is another great one.
Yeah, this is really good.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, if you're still around and still listening to this part. But we appreciate you coming on once again, and good luck with your books there, buddy.
Yeah. Until next time, Pete, let's go chase some profitability.
Let's go chase that profitability, man.
I'm going to hang up here and just go right over there into the profitability chamber. And
it's nice that you have it in the house. I have to go outside the house to go find it, but...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's just behind that. It's a secret chamber behind that plant.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
That's actually not even a plant.
That's not a plant?
No, it's just a portal into profitability.
I love that.
Yeah, it's really good. That. One day you'll see it, but I can't show it on camera.
No, please. I want to let everybody know.
Yeah. Okay, bud.
Awesome. All right. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay. You too. Ciao.